Hey guys, so you would have heard Joya's, Dr. Kemper's CSR or Sustainability and Social Marketing guest lecture that she did for Marketing 301 Strategic Marketing. That was a really great lecture because it gave you a broad overview of, why companies need to consider sustainability and how marketing can be used for social marketing. So there were two quite different but related topics covered in that guest lecture. I thought I'd put together this very quick lecture just to focus in on one particular aspect of corporate social responsibility and why companies do need to start worrying about things like sustainability from a strategic point of view. But I'm going to frame this lecture around this idea of social license to operate. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of this term before, social license to operate, but I think as I go through it, you'll come to see how relevant it is, not only for marketing strategy, but how it relates to Dr. Kemper's guest lecture on sustainability in marketing and also social marketing. So first off, we're going to start with this the series of steps that you see on the slide, starting from the very bottom, where brands or companies face rejection from society and other stakeholders, and moving slowly up those steps up to where you get approval and trust from society and stakeholders. And so this is where social license to operate comes into play. So, first off, businesses are at risk of being rejected if they fail to meet the society's license to operate. Classic examples of this might be, a petroleum company wanting to set up a mining facility off the coast of New Zealand, for example, right? And so the automatic reactive response there from the population or society is to reject that, right? Because it's like, not in my backyard. There's a lot of risks involved with that sort of stuff, as well as, environmental degradation and all that sort of stuff. So there is this rejection, and you see this time and time again with particularly large multinationals that want to set up shop in various democratic countries where people's voices and their social license is worth a lot more, and they can actually veto businesses. So strategically, companies need to work through this process to move from being rejected, gain legitimacy with the local population, so that they move up those steps into this acceptance range, and then they gain credibility, which then moves them up to receiving approval from society and stakeholders, and then if they do everything correctly, they move up even further, and then the population starts to psychologically identify with the corporation, and that's when you build trust. And so social license to operate is a very important thing for any business, not just the large multinationals, although they do seem to face a lot more sort of this resistance initially from local populations, at least in democratic societies where people are able to voice their opinions and protest freely. I'll move on to the next slide, which looks at the same thing, social license to operate, but in a slightly different framework. So this is another way of putting social license to operate, and this is adapted from Boutilier and Thompson. I've got the link down the bottom, which takes you to another really insightful article about social license to operate. I'm going to apply this to a New Zealand specific context, but you may choose to also apply this to your group projects when you do the analysis of your various case clients. You don't have to include social license to operate in your analysis, but it is something that will obviously help to trigger some of your thinking in terms of challenges faced by the companies that you're working for or with, as well as perhaps thinking of ways around those challenges. So much like many of the other tools we cover in this marketing strategy course, it's impossible for you to use all of them, but the more tools you have and the more ways of analyzing a situation, the better the result will be for your client company, because you can see things from numerous perspectives as opposed to just one way. The classic saying is, if the only tool you know how to use is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. So what we try to do in this course is give you, a number of different tools and frameworks that you can use. So using this Boutilier and Thompson social license framework, we can see once again down the bottom, sort of below the line there, you have rejection and withdrawal. And so if a society really does not approve, does not give you that social license to operate within their, their country, then they can, shut down the company essentially. And this can involve anything from boycotting your products and services, so just not supporting you, all the way through to some pretty serious stuff like industrial sabotage, right? Or blocking your supply chain, all that sort of stuff, or filing lawsuits against the company. So that's not good for any company, but at the same time, it's obviously very important, at least in democratic societies, that the population gets to voice their concerns. So if you're the strategist for the company, though, you obviously want to move the population away from the rejection and withdrawal of your products and services to something that's a little bit more, approval. So if we move up, we see that, at the very lowest level, there is this tolerance. So they're not a huge fan of what you're doing, what your company is doing, but they will tolerate you, right? But this is obviously not the best place to be, because they're constantly monitoring what you're doing as a company. And businesses and corporations that work in these sort of slightly dodgy sectors, so to speak, will obviously come under a lot more watchful monitoring. And the next step up then is to gain that approval, which is when the society starts to support what the company is doing. And you're seen as a good neighbor, and there's even a little bit of pride in your collaborative achievements. And so companies that do this really well, particularly those social enterprises, really benefit from society getting behind them and really supporting what they're doing and really believing in what the company is all about. And so if we link this back to Dr. Kemper's guest lecture on corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and all those sorts of topics, you can see why there is a huge incentive strategically for businesses to want to give back to society, because that moves them up this social license to operate pyramid to gaining support and approval from their constituencies. Now the top level is this idea of co-ownership. And so this is when the society or the stakeholders that the company or business is operating in becomes so supportive, and there's such high social license to operate, that the society will actually start lobbying on behalf of the business, trying to gain political support, or maybe the politicians support the business. They start to form, what we can, I guess, describe as a fandom around the business, and will actually start to fight the business's critics on behalf of the business, right? So this co-ownership, where the society or the stakeholders that the business is serving believe in that business so much that they almost treat it as being part of their own in-group. And that's the type of support that obviously all businesses would envy. And that's why things like sustainability and having an environmental policy or using your marketing for good is strategically a very clever move, because not only is it I guess the right thing to do morally, but it also helps to build this advocacy from the society in which the business operates. Now, the example I have of things not going the right way is animal farming in New Zealand, right? And so typically we think of things like dairy, but agriculture in general has a huge carbon footprint, and it's come under a lot of this watchful monitoring over the last decade, right? Particularly in the last 5 years. Before the COVID pandemic sort of grabbed all the national headlines and all our attention, there were sort of these terms or these phrases that were starting to crop up. Terms and phrases like dirty dairy, right? And talk about swimmable rivers, and all of this being linked back to animal farming in New Zealand and how that's degrading the environment. And so this is really ironic, because if you wind the clock back maybe just 15 years, you'll note that in the old days, if you can call it that, we were all very proud of our dairy. We were all very proud that we were known for our sheep farms and our great produce, and basically our entire agricultural system was something that Kiwis really sort of identified with, advocated for, and held with a sense of pride. And very quickly, within the last 5 to 10 years, you see that social license going the other way, which is obviously quite concerning for dairy, but also for other agricultural businesses. And so this is why understanding social license to operate is very important strategically, because it's not only about building up to getting that community advocacy, but it's also about making sure that you don't slip back down that chain, end up being a business or a sector that society is actually being increasingly more critical of. And so I think there's a lot of work there to be done by New Zealand agriculture to really think about and analyze why they have suffered such a loss in social license, when only a short decade ago they were held up with a sense of pride. So that's just some food for thought. And once again, if you haven't already seen Dr. Kemper's guest lectures, please do download those or stream them from our Canvas teaching platform. Thanks, guys. See you next time.